From Washington, D.C. and around the world, this is Government Matters Thought Leadership Network with Mimi Gerges.
Welcome to Agency in Motion DISA, sponsored by GDIT. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Gerges. How do you guarantee the nation's top secret information stays in the right hands and that collaboration among warfighters is secure? DISA is tasked with providing the infrastructure for information sharing and secure communications from the White House and throughout the Defense Department. DIOS is a program at DISA. It's a cloud environment providing seamless collaborations for all communications DoD-wide, whether through email, web conferencing, video, and to do it securely in the unclassified and classified environments. In the first segment of this 30-minute program, we get an update on the DIOS program, and later, a look at how DISA is engaging cyber defenses and preparing for threats and new technologies. Joining me now is Caroline Bean. She's the Director of Joint Enterprise Services Directorate at DISA, and Curtis Puckett, Vice President and General Manager for DISA Enterprise at GDIT. Welcome to both of you. Caroline, I want to start with you. Collaboration became a really big thing during the pandemic shutdown. Is that when DISA began looking at the idea of seamless collaboration, especially in the classified environment?
Yeah, so Mimi, that's a great question. Collaboration definitely was, during the pandemic, an extreme thing that we needed to do, especially since our workers went out and had max telework. It was really important to keep the mission moving. So with the pandemic, we actually started working. It started out with CVR, which was a commercial virtual remote environment that we started out, and we really pushed this out. It was kind of slow rolling, but really the pandemic accelerated us to move out into the unclassified. And we recently started moving out on the collaboration with all of the military departments, the DoD, and also even approaching some of our industry partners as well, and our coalition partners.
And Curtis, explain why that ability matters to the warfighter and to the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be able to connect from anywhere, at any time, on any device, regardless of the transport, you're able to keep the warfighter wherever they're at engaged and having the capability and the tools available that they need in order to have mission success. So that collaboration piece is really huge that we'll talk about, I'm sure, but being connected and having those capabilities there are really important.
So Caroline, what's the status of that DIOS program?
So right now, on the unclassified, we have over 2 million users that are currently on there across the department. We're continuing to grow that as additional users get added on. So that's on our unclass. On our classified, we're really excited because we actually completed our functional testing for the classified environment. This was actually a new build for the Microsoft solution that we have. So there were a lot of things that we needed to test out that we didn't necessarily have to do on the unclassified side. The unclassified, we had the beauty of having the commercial side, and we were able to do a lot of that and utilize a lot of those commercial solutions. But it was a brand new build on the classified side. So we successfully were able to test that out, and we're starting to move out in the end of January. Actually moved out on including all of the component testing, and that'll get after some of the use cases that our military departments have in order to exceed on and engage more in their mission and mission use cases that they have.
I wanted to ask you, Caroline, about something you just said about, on the unclassified side, you get a lot of commercial stuff that's already built, but classified, it's got to be built and it's got to be brand new. So what challenges does that pose to you, and are there any opportunities?
Yeah, so there were definitely a lot of challenges on the classified side, being that it was a new build and it's also air-gapped, which means that we don't have the beauty of utilizing some of the commercial items or solutions that were already built for the unclass side. So some of the challenges that we've had is also in the cybersecurity aspect, and when we want to be able to share that data and information, you'll hear a little bit later, probably another segment on how we secure that data. But our job is to maximize the data information and the data flow between all of the military department. In the classified and how they built it is we don't have just a DoD instance, which is what we have on the unclass side. So what we do is we have an instance that's one platform for the intelligence community, for the Department of Defense, and also for our industry partners. So that obviously produces some challenges, but also some opportunities. I think it opens the door for additional streamlined communications, sharing of information across the board, not just for the Department of Defense, but also across the bow to our coalition partners, to our industry partners, making sure that we've got that federal, state, tribal also sharing information, especially with a lot of what we're hearing in the news today.
Curtis, your perspective on really the fundamental difference between that classified and unclassified environment and how the approach needs to be different.
Yeah, from the unclassified perspective, we got multiple tenants right now, and that cross collaboration is not as easy as it would be if everybody was in the same tenant. When we're using a classified tenant to be able to organize, collaborate, and actually move out quickly in the mission space, it is very important that we're all in the same tenant. If not, we're still building bridges, we're still knocking down walls to connect folks in order to collaborate. That's going to be, that seamless integration is what's really going to save us and have the speed of play that we need to have in that environment.
And Caroline, when you were talking about testing, you know, previously you used the DISA first approach, which is try it out internally on DISA and then include others. But this time you included other DoD components in your testing. Why is that?
So for the classified, it's a little different where we want to make sure that the DoD components, so for example, specifically the US Navy and the Marine Corps, have the disconnected use cases. And so we wanted to make sure that we really drove home the solution that we're actually starting out with also includes the disconnected users as well. So that's a lot of what we're doing with the component user testing. The other thing is we want to foster more of that single tenant that Curtis was talking about. And so with that, what that means is we have to make sure that everyone's prepared. So it's not just DISA, but it's also all of the DoD components as well, making sure that their clients are ready to connect into the solution. And so they have a lot of work as well. So we want to make sure that we're kind of including all of the DoD components to get after really what their mission needs are from the very beginning and then handle that disconnected users.
And Curtis, with that approach to testing, how quickly can you get feedback? How quickly can that feedback be incorporated into the product?
That's really the key. So when we have those military departments and different components engaged and giving us that feedback, we can really get to solving any kind of obstacles that we have. Again, Caroline mentioned earlier that this is a new build, right? There's going to be anything that you take away, you may be introducing. So to get that feedback from different perspectives across the military services would be really key, because not everybody uses the same capabilities inside there, and to have that feedback will inform us on how we need to move forward. So it's very key, and faster the better.
And Caroline, what about engineering and migration support? What kind of support will you be providing to the components throughout this process?
Yeah, so actually through the Defense Enterprise Office solution, that contract, the key and critical point, especially for our unclassified, as Curtis talked about, we're a little more federated. So there's multiple tenants that we have on the unclass side. So it's really important to ensure that we've got engineering support, that we do have a contract that the military departments can engage with if they need someone to manage their tenant. And then it also allows the management and the configuration of the tenants to be essentially a more of a coordinated effort. So that way we continue to keep the interoperability between the tenants, right? That the configurations are looking the same, so we don't lose the momentum of being able to share information, being able to search for folks, for our warfighters to be able to do what they need to do on the unclassified side. So.
And Curtis, you're from the industry perspective, what are your thoughts on that engineering support and the support throughout the migration?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually provide different kinds of support with the DIOS contract. One of them is tenant management, like we can do on the IL5, the unclassified side. But we also do migration assessments. We do migration support. If someone wants to move into the cloud and be a part of this, we can get them there. And also just general engineering support across the board, whether it's networking, engineering, or other things. We're there. We stand at the ready to support DISA and all the customers.
And Caroline, tell me a little bit more about continuity of operations. And whenever you're migrating from one thing to the other, sometimes things can fall through the cracks. So what are you putting in place to ensure that that doesn't happen?
So specifically, we're taking a lot of the lessons learned that we collected from the unclassified solution, and we're actually going in the gate with our classified solution, making sure that we are implementing those lessons learned. So we're fixing a lot of potential issues that we maybe later on in the unclassified realm actually found, and we're putting those from the beginning in the classified. And again, classified, like I said, it has also their challenges and opportunities that we have as well. So as far as the continuity of operations, we're going to continue to evolve. Obviously, the classified will come out of the gate, out of the box, will probably be minimal. So we're starting out with email and SharePoint Online, which is the sharing of files and information. And then we'll eventually move into evolving into chat and being able to do Teams rooms and that sort of thing. So, so that's kind of what we're going to continue to do. We'll continue to evolve as we build out the releases.
And Caroline, obviously everybody in the DoD talks about the pacing threat of China. How do you think about that for DISA?
Yeah, so that's a really important thing, especially just with challenges that we're hearing. And the main goal, like Curtis has stated, is we want to be able to get into at least as a single, maybe not totally single tenant, but even just minimal tenant, so that way we are able to seamlessly collaborate. Part of the classified solution that's going in is actually allowing our coalition partners as well to be a part of that. So we're already opening the doorways right then and there to have that collaboration, to make sure that we're sharing the information, to make sure that the information that's getting to our senior leaders that need to make on-point decisions on a given bad day are actually going to happen. And so that's really what kind of wakes me up in the morning each day and brings me back to work, is the knowing that we are supporting and we are assisting in ensuring that our internally within the U.S. And even our coalition partners have the means to be able to communicate.
And Curtis, part of the many benefits of DIOS is return on investment.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
spell that out for us.
Yeah, it's like any other enterprise program inside the DoD. The hope is that there's adoption. The hope is that everyone comes to that solution because it's scalable, because the cost efficiencies are there whenever everyone adopts that. And that funding that is provided for that program, and then all the other disparate programs doing the same thing, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale well. And so in order to do that through a DIOS program or any other enterprise program, you can bring those dollars back and then you can push them out to more important things. And it's really critical that we take care of business on the easy things and we push out on the harder things like securing our networks, securing our data, and with things like zero trust and beyond.
All right, well, Curtis and Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, we'll discuss DISA's cybersecurity efforts and how they're preparing for next generation technologies.
Agency in Motion, DISA, is sponsored by GDIT. Learn more at gdit.com.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Steve Wallace. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Director of Emerging Technology at DISA. Brian Herman is DISA's Cybersecurity and Analytics Director. And next to him is John Salen. He's Cyber Solutions Director at GDIT. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Brian, I'm going to start with you, actually. Everyone in government is going to zero trust. You've called it more of a journey, that it's really progressively less trust. Explain that.
So there are a number of pillars, depending on who you ask, that represent all the things that we need to do to achieve zero trust. But the basic goal is to assume that you've had a breach and to do all the things that you need to identify the individual, the device, et cetera, that is being connected to the network or connected for access to data or applications. And so we have to cover the terrain that the Department of Defense has, which is federated and complicated. And that means where users come from as well as where data and applications are hosted. So the department has things that are in commercial spaces as well as things that are in on-premises data sites. And so we have to look at all of that. So if any vendor comes to us and says, I can give you zero trust really easily, we know they're not really seeing the whole picture of what we have to accomplish. And that's why we embarked on the Thunderdome program, which is kind of our biggest effort right now to restructure how we secure the DoD's networks. And have to look at it from the perimeter. Even though you assume that there might be a breach, you still want to lock the front door. And so we're putting in all those right controls to be able to secure our application space, our enclaves, as well as the backbone that connects the entirety of the Department of Defense.
So Steve, what is that, the fact that it is a journey, what does that mean to the way DISA implements zero trust?
It is. It's absolutely a journey, and we have to go very selectively in the way that we implement it. There is not one single big bang. There's a series of bangs along the way. Thunderdome was our first foray into that space, and really that came from the place of looking at how users were working in the pandemic, how people weren't necessarily centralized in an office anymore, but were spread about, right? And we were seeing that prior to the pandemic, but really it got accelerated. And as Caroline mentioned about CVR, that was a great set of lessons for us to learn and then apply to what Brian's team is doing with Thunderdome.
And John, a big security challenge is operating in a denied or degraded environment. So there's unique issues then when you're sometimes connected to the cloud, sometimes disconnected.
Yeah, that's a really interesting challenge, because especially as we're trying to adopt the use of commercial tools generally are built with the assumption that you have access to the cloud. But because of the nature of military operations, sometimes we have to be disconnected for, at times, extended periods of time. And that means we just have to rethink how we manage access to data and services, and what kind of data and services we're going to publish as available to our warfighters in a slightly different way.
And Stephen, thinking about that DDIL environment, we've seen in Ukraine the use of commercial comm satellites. Does that solve the problem?
It doesn't completely solve the problem, but it moves us tremendously in a better direction in terms of that ability, not just for access from many different places around the world. Most of the world, once a lot of these low Earth orbit satellite constellations are built out, but also high bandwidth and a tremendous amount of throughput in these environments. So those times when you go and you have less or a DDIL environment you're denied become fewer and fewer and fewer. And as we move to more commercial services and that type of thing, that becomes very important to us.
And then using those commercial satellites, Brian, you still got to secure it.
Absolutely. And so we need to know where a user is coming from, where the device is coming from, information about that user and what they should have access to. But Steve's absolutely right. We want to have fewer cases where the denied or low bandwidth kind of environment actually exists.
And John, what are your thoughts on lessons from Ukraine, specifically on bandwidth needs on the battlefield?
You know, it's interesting, and what Steve said is a really good point. The use of creative use of commercial satellite opportunities for bandwidth really give the warfighter the opportunity to operate like many of us do in the civilian world when we are basically scavenging for transport. Right? As soon as you check into a hotel, one of the first things that I usually ask for is, hey, how do I connect to the Wi-Fi? What's the Wi-Fi password? And if we can translate that concept to the warfighter so that they can get creative to execute the mission, that's fantastic. But one thing that Caroline mentioned in the previous segment is interesting. She brought up Navy and Marine Corps specifically, and that's my background in uniform and prior to joining GDIT. And that's near and dear to my heart, because there are times when you want to operate in a DDIL environment so that you don't give away your location. So that's a very important use case that we still have to solve for. So while, as Steve mentioned, it helps us address a lot of those challenges, it doesn't completely take DDIL out of the equation for warfighter zero trust.
And Brian, you know, as you mentioned, security is not just about knowing the individual, but it's each device. So how are you thinking about access on all those levels?
So it actually follows really well, I think, from what John just said. We actually have to know where the device is coming from. So while they might want to be invisible, we need to know a little bit of information about the device. Is it managed by DoD's networks? Is it secured? Has it been patched, et cetera, so that we can determine how much access we should give a specific device and that individual. So together we can say, I know the individual and I know the device, or I know the individual, but I'm not sure what they're coming from, and maybe we give them less access. And we've actually seen that with the DIOS program, where users can use their own personal computer and their common access card as their identity, but they can access the information, they can view it, but they can't print it, and they can't download it. So we don't have a problem with data leaving the DoD's network. So we're starting to make those fine-grained access control decisions with that information.
And Steve, with the diversity of devices, it requires diversity of credentialing. So how are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. The department really led the way in the early 2000s with the Common Access Card, which is really a smart card that we've used and used quite well over those, over the ensuing years. But what we found is not every device has a smart card reader in it. Not every device is capable of that sort of thing. So we've had to look at other credentials. We've looked towards USB tokens that can plug into a phone or into a personal computer or that type of thing. We've looked at what we learned from CVR. We keep going back to the lessons of CVR, and in hindsight, it taught us a tremendous number of things. But probably one of the most underappreciated things is the ability to use a username and password plus a multi-factor element in order to authorize users into the system. And we saw tremendous benefits from doing that, and it's allowed a lot more flexibility and a lot more agility for the department to be able to access the systems no matter where, no matter what device the user's potentially coming from.
And John, talk about some of the issues around secure data sharing with international allies and with partners, and especially with the idea of the federated credentialing and access.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that, because I think it's important first that we understand what we mean by federating, right? And in most cases, we think of federating in terms of synchronization back with the enterprise. But as we start dealing with forward deployed units in theater, sharing data with foreign mission partners, we also have to think about federating forward with them. And this is where it gets really tricky to operate and share data as the tactical situation changes. And Steve and Brian were both talking about the use of Common Access Card as a standard for credentialing. So let's say, for sake of argument, our Common Access Card has 12 sets of attributes that I identify with John Salin. Well, if I start to try to share data and services with a foreign partner, they may use 8 characteristics to associate their users, or they may have 20. So we have to figure out how to align our attributes with their attributes so that we can make those attribute-based access control decisions to share data and services with them and be effective.
Brian?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think you're spot on. So within the department, we are federating among the identity solutions with the military services, and that's challenging and important. They have their data about their own users. We have the data about some set of joint users. Together, that gives us the ability to make decisions across the department. We're also expanding that to work with federal partners, so they have similar capabilities like our Common Access Cards, and we have a level of trust we can achieve across the entirety of the federal government. The challenging space is what level of trust can we have with our allied and coalition partners, and we have to figure that out fairly well ahead of time in terms of standards and how we're going to go about doing that, because that tends to be something that happens on the fly when missions are occurring. So it's important that we do federation, because the tactical, perhaps non-connected environment is going to require that at some point. But we also have to do it outside of the Department of Defense, and that is a real challenge.
And Steve, you wanted to comment.
Sure, and these gentlemen made great points about the importance of ICAM and the identities of the user, that sort of thing. One of the things that I wanted to sort of tap, though, is it's also about the data quality and the attributes about the user. The technology side of this is not terribly difficult. It's been around for some time. It's pretty well used within industry, but it's actually the attributes about the users and being able to make those decisions that organizations tend to struggle with. And if we don't solve for that, all the technology in the world isn't going to make it better.
Steve, DISA has something called infrastructure as code. How does that work, and how does that provide, quicker capability and better security?
Infrastructure as Code is a fascinating program that came out of our hosting and compute center at DISA. And what they were seeing repeatedly was our mission partners were standing up workloads in cloud environments, and they were having to recreate the security infrastructure around those capabilities again and again. And so what we did is we entered into a number of cooperative research and development activities, or CRADAs, with a number of the commercial cloud providers, and we worked with them very closely to orchestrate their native security and defense capabilities in a repeated manner. So basically, when you come to our hosting and compute center, you can get basically a pre-baked security infrastructure to wrap around your application. So we've gone from the ability to configure, deploy, and secure within days or weeks down to hours, and very rapidly with very little effort on the part of the mission partner.
Brian, we talked in the last segment about DIOS and that rollout for the classified environment. Any specific security challenges that you're dealing with, or things that you're really thinking about?
So one of the challenges is establishing the criteria that we have for whether a user should have access to data and information. So the Office 365 environment that is DIOS actually provides some controls in that space for the department to get our data access requirements put in place that we haven't had before. If data is sitting in shared drives, et cetera, there's not typically the same controls. Oftentimes, if you have access to the network, you have access to the information. This provides us the ability to segment data so that it's shareable where it needs to be, but it's also limited to prevent somebody from having access to too much data.
And Steve, part of your job is to think about emerging technologies. Have you started thinking about quantum and preparing for the post-quantum era?
We absolutely have, and probably the most effort that we've placed into it is around the quantum-resistant cryptography. And there have been a number of articles talking about when quantum may hit mainstream, and that varies. Some folks 5 years, some folks 7. But the bottom line is there's a lot of investment going into quantum, both within the U.S., but even more so, we talked about the pacing challenge of China. China is making significant investments into the quantum computing. And so NIST released the quantum-resistant algorithms last year. DISA is in the process of working through how we evaluate those algorithms, how do we implement those algorithms, and better secure the department.
And beyond quantum, is there anything that you're really excited about that's coming up?
Sure. And it's just starting to hit the mainstream, but a capability, folks refer to it as generative AI. So in the fall, the OpenAI Foundation released ChatGPT, and earlier in the year, DALL-E. And what you're seeing is this ability using AI to actually generate content based on, reasonably small data sets. I think in ChatGPT it was a little over 500 gigs of data, but you're seeing this ability to generate. And I've played with it myself. I've had friends. You have it's fascinating. To share a little bit over the weekend, I was bored, and this is what I do when I'm bored. I asked ChatGPT to write a rap about DISA in the form of Tupac Shakur, and it did it. Now it was fascinating the way that it interpreted what DISA's mission was, and those sorts of things. It created this content on the fly, and looking at how it's going to change all of our lives and all of our environments. We're looking very hard at how it impacts, or how it can accelerate and improve the services that DISA provides to the department.
John, sum up this segment for us, especially about how all this supports the warfighter and the mission.
So if we think about how to support the warfighter and the mission through technology, we have to remember one thing, and Carolina touched on this in the previous segment, and this really, what she said, it really takes me back to my days before supporting the FSI community when I was working in Silicon Valley. We do development and requirements based on use cases. Use cases eat shall statements for lunch. And if you can learn nothing else from this conversation, let's bring that home, because the way DoD typically writes requirements makes it less easy to think of the warfighter's needs. But if we think about it in terms of, I am a forward deployed Marine or a sailor or a flight line operator maintaining an aircraft, and here's what I need to do in order to execute my mission, we can then think about how we're using that technology and those data and services in a more effective way. And that's really how we can get to yes here.
All right. Well, John, Brian, and Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for watching Agency in Motion DISA, sponsored by GDIT. This is the latest installment of our Agency in Motion series. For more information about DISA and the DIOS program, go to govmatters.tv/AIM and scroll down to DISA. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Gerges.